Welcome to the Ask Andrew show. Tonight we're doing things differently. In 2021, we've decided to change the time of the show to 8 p.m. So we're still going to be doing the show once per month, but now the live show will be at 8 p.m. And to start the new year, we decided to do the show very differently. Today, I'm actually going to be the guest, and I'm going to be talking about my own divorce and how it felt to be a divorce lawyer who also was going through a divorce. And I'm going to have one of my senior associates, Anna Troitschanski, be the host of the show. Anna's a very experienced lawyer. She's been with the firm since 2012, and she practices in all areas of family law. Anna, I'm going to hand it over to you now.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you for having me on the show. I'm very excited to take the role of Andrew Feldstein today on the Ask Andrew show. And I'd like to begin with our first question. I know that you could speak about your divorce from a legal perspective, but I think it would also be interesting for the viewers to hear about it from your own personal perspective as a father and ex-spouse. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, it's interesting when you ask that question, because there's all sorts of different places that you go to when you say about your thoughts. Because when you first start to go down the road of separation and you realize your marriage is breaking up, you have certain things that you're really unsure of. You're wondering, what is your relationship going to look like with your kids? How are your kids going to be after the separation and divorce? Because as a parent, you feel like a failure as a parent. You feel you failed your kids because now you're putting them through turmoil that you never wanted to put them through. And here they are. They're going to pay the price for your own failure. So there's a lot of guilt that you go through. And then there's the uncertainty, the economic uncertainty. Am I going to be able to afford a decent house for my kids? How much money am I going to have left over? In my case, I'm the payor. So how much am I going to have left over after I pay support? And I know I'm in a much better position than most people to try and figure that out right away. But it still doesn't mean that you're not insecure, because as anyone knows in family law, there's a lot of gray. And as a lawyer, I knew where all the goalposts were in those gray areas.
That's right. And in your opinion, do you believe that being a family lawyer made the process easier or more difficult?
In some places, I think it made it much easier because I was well aware of what the process would look like. I understood it. So when you start off in a family law case, you have to start off with financial disclosure. That meant that I knew what my obligations were in terms of disclosure. So I don't know, it was probably within a month or two of separation, my former spouse had a sworn financial statement. She had all the backup disclosure that I had, and I had already hired an expert to value my business. So I had things moving at a much faster pace than someone who wasn't a divorce lawyer. But it didn't mean that I did not want to get to resolution just as bad as everyone else does. Uh, I candidly admit I'm a type A person. When you're a type A person, you like to know where you stand. For me, I separated in the end of February, beginning of March 2013, and it took me till May 2014 to settle my case. That was the only time in my life I felt like I just didn't know where I was going to stand, because I didn't know where it was going to all land. Was I going to end up in litigation and spending hundreds of thousands of dollars? How was a judge going to rule? Was a judge going to say I made more money than I said? Was a judge going to accept what I said? What type of conflict was that going to create with my spouse? All of these issues are unknowns, and because I do it for a living, I know where the full gamut could end up coming from that.
But I guess the unpredictability component is nonetheless still there.
Absolutely, it's still there. And one of the things that I found really interesting is how many times clients phone me up and complain when their spouse's lawyer, when they get the letter from their spouse's lawyer, because it would be a letter that would just inflame them and get them angry. And I would say, calm down, relax, it's okay, we'll deal with it. I see this every day. And I never realized it until I was on the receiving end on a personal level to one of those letters, where I thought, wow, these really do get to you, because your initial reaction is to take it very personal. So I found that part to be really fascinating. From a lawyer, it gave me great insight to how our clients feel when they get one of those letters. I especially think when my lawyer would send me an email, and you've been in my office before when you hear my emails going off. I can get several hundred emails in a day. But when I see that email from my lawyer come in, it was boom, I had to see it right away because I wanted to know what was going on because I wanted to get to that closure.
Drawing from your own experience, what advice can you give parents when it comes to speaking to their children about the divorce and the separation process?
Well, I'm going to start with by saying the night, it was late afternoon, evening, when my spouse and I, actually was after dinner, when my spouse and I told our kids about the divorce. And at the time, they were 9 and 7 years old. And that was probably, I would rank one of probably the worst night next to the nights when my parents passed away in my life. It is an absolute awful experience. So I'm going to begin with, you want to tell them in a good way. And my former spouse and I, we were actually on pretty good terms at that point, and we were able to tell my children together that we both made a decision that marriage was coming to an end and that we were separating. I'd actually already bought a house, and I showed them some pictures of a house where I'd be moving, which was close to where their mother lived, and she'd be staying in the home to try and make everything as easy and peaceful as we could. And the piece that I'll never forget was my daughter had email on her iPod, and my ex would get copied on all of her emails. And my daughter emailed one of her friends saying, my mom and dad are getting a divorce. My dad's moving out, and this is way too fast. Sorry, I'm getting a little choked up as I say it. The level of failure that you feel is awful because you're hurting. And that's the hardest part of it. No matter how well you try to position it, which was, we said to them, mommy and daddy will still be friends. You'll still see mommy and daddy. It's nothing you did. We tried to say it in all of the positive ways, and I think we did. But no matter what, kids know it's not a good thing. And that's the painful part of it. And I remember that was a horrible, horrible evening. There was a lot of crying by my kids. I know I felt horribly guilty. And when I say I feel guilty, I didn't do anything wrong to feel guilty, but I felt like a failure, like I said earlier, because, we let my kids down and all. And I remember one of the things my daughter said was probably about 2 years before we split up. She asked my former spouse and I, about divorce. And she said, would you ever get divorced? And my former spouse said, we would never get divorced because if our marriage had troubles, we would go to counseling, get the advice, and we would fix it. And my daughter called us out on that and said, why aren't you going to fix it? Why aren't you going? And that was a really hard one to answer because, quite frankly, I wanted to go to counseling. We went a couple of times to counseling. My ex really didn't want to go to counseling. And at the same time, I didn't want to throw her under the bus to my kids. So I didn't say that. I did not want to say anything that was not neutral to both of us because I thought what was best for my kids was hearing a very neutral, both mommy and daddy love you, and this was both mommy and daddy's decision, and this was on both of us and had nothing to do with them. And I thought that was very important in the messaging, especially when they're 9 and 7. It's going to be a very different discussion if you have teenagers, if you have kids in their 20s, because they're going to have a lot more of an idea. I've had clients say when they tell older kids, the kids say, what took you so long? It was pretty obvious to us you shouldn't be together. So those are some of those issues.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I know that wasn't easy. And, this is a very sensitive topic in general. So thank you for sharing that with us and your viewers. I think it's important to understand it from that perspective. Just as a follow-up, how do you deal with or adapt to having two different parenting styles when you are separated? It's difficult to co-parent when you are in the same relationship, but I can only imagine that the challenge is so much more when you guys are separated.
Well, it's an interesting perspective because what I found in my own experience was that when I separated from my former spouse, we were probably more aligned in our parenting style. And now that I've been separated about 8 years, I can see that that alignment over time has gone further and further in different directions where we don't necessarily see things eye to eye. We don't necessarily parent in the same fashion. And really, what you're telling your kids is there are rules at mom's house, there are rules at dad's house. They may be different rules. Your mother loves you, your father loves you, and at the end of the day, you have to follow your mother's rules when you're there. You have to follow your father's rules when you're here, and that's the only messaging that you really can say to the kids. I mean, sometimes there are significant issues, or maybe a different viewpoint on what the children should be enrolled in or are doing. Fortunately, I haven't had that kind of problem, but you can have situations of smaller ones. Bedtimes is a great example. Phone calls to the other parent. One parent facilitates, the other one doesn't. Uh, there's all sorts of little things that can go on that are different. I can say this for my ex and I: when one of our children have a health related issue, we're able to work. We've always been able to work it out, no matter whether we have conflict or don't have conflict. I remember one time my son was away at overnight camp, and when he was away at overnight camp, he uh, he had a situation where he got sick and he was in the hospital at camp, and somebody had to go pick him up at camp, bring him into sick kids in the city. And I was already somewhat up north, so we had no problem saying, "Fine, I'll go get him." I brought him to the hospital, and we were able to work everything out. So sometimes emergencies also bring people together to work in a more positive fashion in that sense.
Well, I would think at the end of the day, both of you have your children's best interest at the forefront. The parents want the best for their children, so I can understand why you'd want to work together in a medical emergency. We actually have a question for from the audience. It seems. What would you do differently if you could redo the process, the divorce?
Well, I think there's a couple of ways to look at that. If you're saying to me, what would I have done differently in terms of my negotiation or resolution of my matter? That's one way to look at it. Another way to look at it is, would I have done anything differently after I had the deal in terms of my parenting relationship with my children, co-parenting with my ex? I'll start with the negotiation process. I I feel good about that process because I was very transparent. I gave the disclosure. I wanted to get to a negotiated resolution. I wish we could have done that. We would have been able to resolve the matter sooner. I wish we would have been able to get through it. When I was going through my separation, it was an extraordinarily difficult time in my life. My mother was in the hospital in the ICU before she passed away. I remember, going to a settlement meeting where I'd finished the settlement meeting, which is really stressful. And then I remember I'd go drive to the hospital after to see my mother in the ICU. Uh, so I would have liked to have resolved it faster. Didn't work out. Nothing I could really do about that. I think it was more about my ex's feeling comfortable with the process and feeling comfortable with the resolution that we arrived at, which I think was fair to everybody. If you're saying to me about what could I have done different in retrospect since the separation, there's one place that really bothers me in what I did. It has to. I made a point that I would put my children first and foremost over everything in my life. And that meant, and you know this, I completely rearranged my schedule at work. And when I had my parenting days, I picked up my children every day from school. And you probably could have asked a good number of the mediators and judges that I appeared in front of that they probably knew my parenting schedule because I made sure that my all my court appearances and mediation appearances all aligned so I could be there to pick up my kids from school. And I felt like, I'm really sending a message to my children about how I'm giving them, making them the number one priority in my life. But the downside to what I did is I also diminished some important lessons to my children. They view their life as, things are given to them. They've had a lot of good fortune being my children in that sense. And what I diminished is I didn't teach them the lesson that having good fortune in life comes with a cost of hard work. And they didn't get to see that their father really worked hard, because what they saw was everything seemed easy. Their mother didn't work. I'd go to work, but I could still pick them up from school. I had them every Monday, Tuesday, and every Monday, Tuesday, I'd be there in time to pick them up from school. I could take them to school. And that meant that there was no appreciation for the fact that there was a lot of sweat and hard work put into them having the life that I've been able to provide everyone in my family with. And that's a regret, because now that they're older, I'm able to work, and now it's COVID, so I don't have to worry about running home to pick up my kids at school or anything like that. But I diminished it. So they never saw that I would work till 7:30, 8 o'clock on the nights that I didn't see them. They didn't see that I may have done work on the weekends when they weren't with me, because unless I had a trial, I made a point. I wasn't working on the weekends they were with me. So they saw their father being basically as available to them as a stay-at-home parent would be, or as their mother in our case. And I think that they needed more balance in their life to realize that hard work, dedication, commitment yields positive results. And a lot of times I think I failed my children, and that I didn't do a good enough job at teaching them that lesson.
That's a really fair point. It's natural that both parents would move on with their lives and introduce new partners after a divorce. How do you deal with introducing a new partner to your children?
It's interesting because in my I'll tell you how I did it, because I've been with a absolutely wonderful lady who I met probably, I think it was about 7 months after I separated. And we dated for some time before I introduced her to my children. So I started dating her in July of 2013. And I waited, I think, to probably around March 2014 before I even introduced her to my kids. Kids knew that I dated. I thought that was okay. They knew at one point that I had a girlfriend, but I wanted to make sure I knew that the relationship in my mind was a stable relationship. It was a relationship that was going to be long lasting, that I wasn't dating anybody else, she wasn't dating anybody else. And I felt that, what, we had started dating 8 months earlier. I felt that that was enough time, that I felt comfortable in this relationship, that I wanted my children to meet her. But everything that we did was very slow at the beginning, because at the beginning, she came over the first time. She came over one night to join us for dinner, you know, because all too often we see cases where the new partner is thrust into the kids' lives and is, here's your new mother kind of thing. Here's your new father. And I really wanted to do it nice and slow, making sure my kids were comfortable, that my kids liked her. And, and we did it that way. And even after she moved in, we did it, slow. And I have to say, she's a great lady, because she always makes sure, even now, we've been together, it'll be 8 years this summer. She still encourages me to have absolutely great one-on-one time with my son. Before COVID, she'd always encourage me we do sometimes baseball road trips and going to sporting events. And even during COVID, if there's a night, there's a Leaf game or a football game, things of that nature. She says, go watch. It's a precious time before your son goes off to university. You need to have that bonding time. So I'm lucky to have somebody that really supports me in a relationship in that fashion.
Do you have any recommendations for viewers with respect to bringing other people into your family and having a smooth transition? I think you partly answered this question in terms of your own personal experience and how you did it. But is there any other pieces of advice that you can sort of throw out there for our viewers as to how to incorporate someone new into the family and to make it a smooth transition?
You need to take it slow. You can't just rush. We see it way too often in cases where somebody separates, they have a new partner, they want to thrust the new partner right into the new relationship. right away. And that creates a lot of negativity for the children because they feel like, wait a second, I have a mother, I have a father. You're trying to throw this new person in. They need the opportunity to start with mourn the loss of the family unit that they were accustomed to. They need to start coming out of that in their own mindset to feel comfortable, to understand mom will probably want to be with somebody, dad will probably want to be with somebody, and you got to do it nice and slow, and not just all of a sudden, here, hey, here's my new partner, they're moving in, and every minute we're all going to be together because we're this new happy family. It needs to have time. You need to be patient. It's not going to happen overnight. And just because you do give things time and you do and you're patient, that doesn't mean it's going to work either. Lots of things in life can get in the way. Blended families have an enormous amount of challenges. And when they say the second relationship is more likely to have a divorce than the first relationship, the statistics bear that out. And one of the challenges is it's hard enough when a mother, a father, and their kids can't make it work in a house. It's that much harder when you take, for example, kids from a different relationship in different houses, put them all together, and then hope that everybody can make that mix work. Because when you have one person's kids and the other person's kids don't get along, there's inherent conflict that's being created that makes a relationship that much harder. And then you have to remember one person may be paying support to the other one. There may be litigation going on with one or both. There may be conflict. There's a lot more going on in a second relationship that creates ingredients of problems. I think of it this way. I remember my last house, my kids had to share a bathroom together.
Right.
Okay. And I hear them fighting. You can't look at my mirror while I'm brushing my teeth. When I say look at my mirror, I mean turning their head from when they were standing in front of their sink and looking in the mirror that the other kid would use. And all of a sudden there'd be screaming between the two of them that I'd have to break up. And I'm thinking, this is a brother and a sister, and I'm the sole parent. Imagine what would happen if that stepchildren and now the parents join in, and one parent is mad at, or one partner is mad at the other partner because their child's being ridiculous and they think their child's being ridiculous, and how something as stupid as looking in the mirror in the morning getting ready for school can morph into a huge fight.
Actually have a question from our audience, which deals with COVID, and how has COVID impacted your co-parenting? And maybe you can tell us a little bit about your personal situation in light of the pandemic.
Well, basically for a while we were doing a week on, week off schedule, which is different than our normal schedule. We returned back to the normal schedule when school resumed in September, where I have Monday, Tuesdays, my former spouse has Wednesday, Thursdays, and my son is going back and forth in that fashion. And at this point, we all have to have faith that the other person is doing what they need to do to keep everybody safe and continuing on in the parenting schedule in that fashion. There really isn't much else that we can do. I mean, my situation's a little unique. I live on the same street as my former spouse. So, for example, one change we have is after online learning is over, on the exchange day at lunchtime, that's when my son will go back and forth. So today, when he finished his morning session of school, he walks 10 houses down the street and goes to his mother's house for the afternoon. And he's now there until the next time he comes back to me. But for the most part, it's just the same. It's the challenge of, it's a different environment now with online learning versus having to worry about picking up my son at school or the driving back and forth, those kind of issues.
I guess it also matters as to the age of the kids. Your kids are a little bit older, so probably makes it a little bit easier from that perspective to manage during these difficult times as well.
Well, I think having teenagers is always easier. I know during the pandemic, pardon me?
In one way, it may not be so much easier on another, right? Teenage.
Well, that's true. But I guess I'm looking at it from the perspective of what they can do. Because I see, sometimes you've brought your kids into the office, other staff have brought their kids into the office. And I look at them, and part of me is envious of remembering what it was like having children at that age. And I quickly get reminded, yeah, they're cute and fun when they're hanging around you for 10 or 15 minutes, but it's very different when the weekend is constant mommy, 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 or daddy, 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 and there's no break and there's no let up, and you're not remembering that part. And I guess that's part of the way life is. But yeah, I do think it would be a lot more demanding, because if I'm working from home, my son goes, he does his online schooling. It's really a question of, does he make lunch on his own, or do we have lunch together? But it's not the same. I mean, there was an Ask Andrew show where I was doing it and he was doing online learning, and you can see him sort of walking around in the background of the screen. But it's very different than having a young kid who needs you to make sure that they're set up, make sure that they're actually sitting there and learning and not getting distracted and doing other things. With teenagers, it's not the same issue.
My mother always said, little kids, little problems, big kids, big problems. So, there's a trade-off. Just to go to our next question here, from your own experience, what was the most frustrating aspect of your matter, your divorce case?
Well, the most frustrating part is when you have conflict, because I like to think that I do this for a living. And when this all happened, I thought I could avoid conflict. I thought I probably would be able to make this into the most wonderful, successful, positive divorce. And unfortunately, my ex and I haven't seen things eye to eye. We've had conflict. It's not good for my kids that we've had conflict, but that's the reality of life, is there has been some conflict. And, I even said this to my lawyer. I remember when I was in court one time on my own matter, and I commented to him at a case conference and go, I couldn't even begin to count how many case conferences I've been to in my career. And they're not stressful. I go to them all the time. I'm used to it. I said, at my own case conference, I go, this is the first time I've actually felt stress. He goes, yeah. He goes, he gets that. And I said, I think it's a good thing for me, because it gives me more empathy and understanding for my clients. So if you're going to say to me, what was the most frustrating thing is, I wish that we would have been able to successfully negotiate it, so I never had to see a courtroom ever. I wish we would have been able to successfully negotiate it, so there would have been no conflict. And I wish that, my kids would have had this great, amazing life that they would have never seen that there was any conflict in their lives. I believe that they have. And that's regrettable. It's not in their best interest, but that's probably the reality. And those would be my regrets. I wish that I could have figured out a way to avoid it. Unfortunately, it didn't happen. That's reality. I can also say, by the same token, we only ever had to make 2 court appearances in our matter. So from a different perspective, well, maybe that is a success, because we didn't have a long, drawn-out battle that went on for years. We certainly didn't spend hundreds of thousands of dollars. And I like to think, for the most part, my kids are doing amazing at school. My daughter is graduating from high school right about now. I think Friday's probably her last day. Going off to university next year. She's getting a scholarship. My son is doing great this year in school. So I look at it and say, at the end of the day, I'm sure I've made mistakes. I'm human. I'm sure my ex has made mistakes, but I like to think that my kids are doing well, and hopefully they're on their way to having amazing lives. And as a parent, it means you're a teacher. I'm sure if I went back in time, there are things I wish I could teach my kids to do a better job than I did. But I would challenge to find anyone who's a parent who doesn't have that feeling.
Thank you. We've got another question here. How has the social media impacted divorce cases in the last 8 years?
Okay. I will do this as the last question, because I'm going to take over a little bit as a host, because we're basically out of time right now. But social media is a place where there's communication. And I would say to anybody that you need to be mindful of who's watching your social media. One of the things we tell all of our clients in do's and don'ts is, don't say things in social media that you don't want to end up in a courtroom, because it may make you look bad. You should not be friends with your former spouse because they may decide to use it. Uh, Basically, you've got to be smart with what you put on social media. If you're not going to be smart about it, well, you may end up with problems. Uh, this is probably the most candid that I've ever spoken in a public forum about my own personal case, which hasn't been easy. But I thought it would be a good idea because I think it might be very helpful for people to appreciate that they're not the only ones who have gone through this. We're divorce lawyers, but we're also people. We're also mothers and fathers. And do I wish I never had to experience divorce? Of course, I wish that. It would have been much better for my kids. But I did. They did. That's going to be part of their experience in life. I'm hopeful that, that they will be able to learn from it. And I hope that they'll both do better than I did and better than their mother did, and that they can remain in an intact marriage. And I try to think of my current relationship as trying to give an example and teach my children of what a good relationship looks like, because the problem with staying in a bad marriage is all you're teaching your kids is this is what a bad relationship looks like. And you really want them repeating your own mistakes. So in that sense, should my ex and I have stayed together? Absolutely not. I don't think we were a good fit together. I don't think, the best thing we ever did was have our two kids together. But the problem is, I think the lesson that we were teaching them as a couple would have been a lesson that wasn't how to be in a good, positive relationship, because I don't think we were a good fit together. Okay, I see it's.
I believe you're taking away my power, sir. I was enjoying this very much. I've got to hand over the reins.
And I wanted to say thank you, Anna, for taking over as the hostess today. It felt very weird talking about my own personal history. I wanted to let everyone know that our next show is on February 17th at 8 p.m. We welcome you to watch the show, and we welcome you to give suggestions on a topic that you may like for a show. That can be sent by email to info@feldsteinfamilylaw.com. And always feel free to visit our website, separation.ca, to learn any helpful information about separation or divorce. And thank you for joining us. Thank you for watching us tonight.